Hi, you're watching Reflections. Reflections is a TV show about the mission and ministry of Paducah Cooperative Ministry. PCM is a local help agency here in Paducah that tries to help those in our community who may find themselves in difficult circumstances and situations. One of the beautiful things about PCM is that it is supported by over 40 faith communities here in the area, and all of us work together to help provide for that ministry. It is a ministry where our motto is we're doing God's work with human hands. Hi, my name is Jay Gottman. I'm the lead minister at First Christian Church, and today I am excited as part of our program to introduce to you a newer member of the faith community and leadership at Westminster Presbyterian Church. Her name is Pamela Gordon, and we're glad to have you here today. Welcome, Pamela.
Thank you.
I want to start out by saying welcome to Paducah, even though you have been here for a while now. And I'm extremely excited to hear about who you are and where you're from and how you ended up here in Paducah.
Well, you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not a local girl. I'm from across the Atlantic. I was born and raised in Irvine in Scotland, and I lived there for over 30 years. And my father and my two older brothers still live there. All my family are back there, and so I'm a Scottish girl at heart.
And so, when did you experience a call to ministry? Was anyone in your family in the ministry?
No one was in the ministry as such, but I was born and raised in the Presbyterian Church, and my mum and dad were very actively involved. My mum up until her death, and then my dad was an elder in the church. And my mum was so involved that I made a commitment when I was 11 that I would never get involved in the church as much as she did. And God kind of must have laughed at me and said, "Yeah, right, wait till you see what I have planned." And I was born and raised in the church and went through youth group. I became a member of the church when I was 15, got actively involved, and then I trained in administration for 2 years. And I got my first job in a law office, but I just didn't feel settled in it. I felt there was something more for me to do, and I felt with the clients coming in that were dealing with matrimonial cases and difficult cases, I just felt there was I needed to get beyond the desk and help these people. And I said, Lord, what do you want me to do? And I was a very new Christian. I hadn't been a Christian for that long. And my boss called me in one day and said, well, our senior partner has left and we're not bringing in as much revenue, so we need to let you go. And I was devastated, but at the same time I thought, okay, this is the answer. So I sought out God, what he wanted me to do, and I left home and moved to a training centre in central Scotland where I trained in evangelism for a year. And I sensed God calling me to be a missionary. And so I spent some time in the Philippines, and then after that I hadn't graduated from high school even. I dropped out when I was 16, but I really sensed God's calling in my life to go to college, and so I moved again from home to Aberdeen, went to Aberdeen University, and then 5 years later I graduated with a Master's in Divinity.
Oh, wonderful.
And then I spent 2 years in China teaching English, convicted that this was where I was going to be, as a missionary, and use that experience to go somewhere else. And after 6 months I got home, and my mum handed me the Presbyterian Church of Scotland magazine and said, look for a job in that, see if there's anything going. And there was a job available as an assistant pastor in California. So I applied and I got the job. And I don't think my mum was too happy that she handed me the magazine in the first place, but I applied and got the job. And so 6 months after being home from China, I was packing my bags again and went to California, and that's how I got into the United States of America.
Oh my gosh! So you've been all over, and what have you taken from each of those experiences, being in the Philippines and China and then California, all very different cultures?
One of the memories I have was visiting a family where there was a little boy he was about 2 years old, and his only toy was a cardboard box. And they had a water pump for washing their clothes, and there was me thinking about my family back home who had the automatic washing machine. And I made a promise then that I'd never be ungrateful. Mm-hmm. And then when I went to China, again, I was living a very simplistic life. When I turned on the channels and the TV, it was all Chinese. I only knew survival Chinese. I had to eat Chinese food, of course, and rely on the people around me to help me travel, to even to teach the students English. And I just had to become and of course, living in a communist country, I had to be very careful about how I practiced my faith. But I found people very curious about what I believed, and they initiated conversations. And there's a deep hunger over there to know about God. And I think I honestly probably evangelized more there than I ever have anywhere else. But I had to deal with simple living and living on the basics. I listened to the BBC World Service. There was no the internet was just getting off the ground at that time, and I had email, thankfully, but there was no Skype or anything like that, so I really had to live off the basics.
Sure. Well, now, even here in the States, sometimes women in ministry find it difficult. How have you been received in foreign countries, or even when you moved here to the States?
Well, when I was in China, I was one of 3 white people in a city of 2 million. And so it was like being a member of the royal family. I was given the red carpet treatment, and I loved it. I was very humble. It was just an incredible experience. And I remember a little girl had never seen a white person before, and I think she was terrified of me. But she very gently and hesitantly came up and touched my skin and realized, oh, she's just human, just like me. And but I've always been very warmly received when I was welcomed into the States. It was just, the honeymoon period lasted a long time, to say that.
Wonderful.
They made me feel very welcome.
And what part of California did you minister in?
I was in a city called Lompoc, which is in Santa Barbara County, so it was a very nice place to be.
Sure. And how long did you serve the congregation there in California?
Well, I moved in 2001 in January, and I stayed there till about January of 2005.
Okay.
So 4 years.
And what was your primary ministry there?
I was assistant to the pastor, so I did visitations. I assisted in worship and all the worship services that we have, weddings and funerals. I visited people. There were emergency visitations if the senior pastor couldn't be there, and I was also the director for children's ministries and youth ministries.
Okay. Now, would you do mission trips and things like that because you had this broad experience?
We did do mission trips, and the highlight of my time was actually taking my youth group and several adults to my hometown. We took a trip to Scotland, and we did a vacation Bible school at the church that I grew up in. And so that was very surreal to me. I took my youth to the place where I was baptized, where my family were active in the church, and it was just 2 worlds collided, and it was memory-making times, and I can still go back home and talk to them about my American friends, and then my American friends are talking about my Scottish friends.
Oh,
it was incredible.
That's wonderful. And so what brought you from California to Paducah, Kentucky?
Well, I moved from California to Paducah via Ohio.
Okay.
I was almost ordained, and unfortunately my mother passed away at the time I was due to be ordained, so we postponed that, but I still moved to Ohio. And then I was finally ordained, and you have to go through the process of applying, looking for jobs as they do in the working world. And I found a job for this church in a little town called Grand Rapids near Toledo, and I just knew that was it. And I didn't want to move to a small town. It was a small town of 1,000 people, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted to live in a big area, where it was really alive and there was a lot going on. But the second I arrived there, I just knew this is it. This is it. It's very hard to explain. I'm sure you can relate to that, but I just knew that was where I was meant to be.
Yeah, that sense of God calling you
Yep.
to be in a certain place, and knowing that you're just meant to be there. And
Mm-hmm.
so when did you move to Ohio then?
I moved there in, I think it was in 2005. I took the Amtrak train from Los Angeles all the way cross country to Toledo, Ohio.
And now were you in a solo ministry at that point?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
Yes.
And so that was your first time
Yes.
doing everything?
Yes, and luckily it was a very small congregation. They were very caring, very supportive. In fact, when I showed up, the house was already, the furniture was placed, everything was in its place. And I was overwhelmed by that. I wasn't expecting that. And so they gave me a lot of love and a lot of time to get settled.
That's
so,
wonderful. Yeah. That's wonderful. And so I imagine you got into a pretty good routine with all the preparation that goes into doing everything and
Yes.
wearing many different hats
Yes.
in ministry. And so you were there for almost 2 years then?
It was actually almost about, I moved here in 2010, so it was about 4 or 5 years.
4 or
I
5,
was in
okay.
Ohio.
Okay. And so then what was it that helped you move from Ohio to Paducah?
Well, the economy took a downturn in that community, and so it was reflected in our church, and I felt it was best for the church that I was working at and for myself that I move on. So I started looking for another calling, and I went through many interviews on the phone, and in October of 2009, I was looking at jobs, and I saw this job description for Paducah, and I thought, Paducah, I know that name from somewhere. So I Wikipedia'd Paducah, and I'm a Stephen Curtis Chapman listener.
Oh, okay.
And then that's how I was familiar with the name Paducah, because I listened to Stephen Curtis Chapman's music. And I contacted the church. Kathy Crecelius was my first initial contact. And I came out here, and after a couple of days, again, there was just that sense that I was needed here. When I talked to the pastor nominating committee and talked about their needs, they felt that I was the right person, and I felt, yes, this is where this is where I'm supposed to serve.
Yeah, and so you move here and you begin getting involved in the congregation. And so, what are some of the, I guess, the skills or the great passion that you bring to congregational ministry?
Passion for congregational visitation, meeting people where they are in the tragedies of life and in the triumphs of life. Triumph being a baby being born. When someone gets married, I was blessed to participate in a Scottish Highland wedding at the Western Kentucky Festival in Murray this year, and just being there in the tragedies of life, when you're in the cardiac care unit at one of the hospitals and someone takes their last breath, it's humbling for me to be able to be with someone whose loved one is passing away before their very eyes.
Sure.
And to support people and pray with people, I get such joy from that.
Sure. And so in your interactions with folks around here, obviously you have an accent, and how are you received, and how do people interact with you?
Very warmly. I'm out walking my dog, and so people start talking to the dog first, and because she's a very attractive dog, and I start talking and I tell them what her name is, and her name's Bonnie, which means beautiful. It's a Scottish name. And of course they pick up on the accent, and they ask the question like you asked, well, how did you end up in Paducah, Kentucky?
Right.
And I tell them, well, I'm the pastor at Westminster Presbyterian Church. And they tell me about their heritage, all my great-great-great-grandfather came on the boat from Europe, and it just starts a very interesting conversation.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, have any of, you say you have 2 brothers, your father, have they been able to come over and visit you at any point in your ministry in the U.S.?
My eldest brother came to represent the family at my ordination, and then he returned to Ohio a couple of years later, and then my father, who's retired, spent an entire month with me in Ohio, so he really got to see what his youngest kid and only daughter was doing, and he saw me conduct a wedding, and I asked him, Dad, how did you feel seeing your daughter up there do this? He says, well, it was kind of strange, but he said, I knew you were just doing your job. But I know he's very proud of me.
Yeah, so they didn't have any trouble with you going into ministry or anything like that?
Well, they were concerned about me moving to the States because I had only just gotten home 6 months before. I live in a mixed bag family of beliefs. Kenneth is an atheist. My brother isn't sure, and I'm at the other end of the scale. And so, but they do respect what I do, and they support me 100%.
Yeah. So you just bring a real diversity to the family then with all your travels and everything else. Well, tell me, what are some of the goals that you and the congregation at Westminster Presbyterian have that you're working toward, and some exciting things that are taking place in the ministry there?
Well, one of my goals is to have a church without walls. Is to break down the barriers that are there, and there seems to be this expectation that people will come to us. And Jesus didn't minister that way. He went to them. And so that's like my goal. And I've tried to make that my goal at Westminster Presbyterian. And we've done it in a variety of ways. One of the most satisfying things I loved doing during the summer was when they did the Bikes on Broadway. And we would stand and just, we did what was called a blessing of the bicycles. And people would stop because we had free Dippin' Dots ice cream. And we would lure them in with free Dippin' Dots ice cream. And when they were there, we would ask them, would you like to have your bicycle blessed? And they're like, sure, why not? And then we would hand out flyers telling them who we were and where the church was based. And they would offer donations of money. I said, no, this is all free. You know, we're doing this because we want to share God's love. So we're going out to them, and I think that is what we're trying to do, is to break down the walls that are there that cause barriers, and to get out and amongst the people.
Sure. When you have a wonderful location, if you want to tell folks where that is.
We're on 2832 Broadway.
Yeah.
Right next door to Western Baptist Hospital, which is very convenient for visits.
That's right. Just walk out your back door and you're there.
That's
right. Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned breaking down the walls. I think many pastors and people in leadership and ministry obviously understand that that's what Jesus asks us to do, to be out in the community and not to make that assumption that people will automatically just come to us based on who we are and what our beliefs are. Somebody was sharing with our congregation recently that there's a divide sometimes between what church members expect and what we in ministry expect of our personal ministries.
That's right.
And the divide is, according to one study, that when you ask church members what they think the minister in the church is all about, I think about 80% of these survey respondents said it's all about the church taking care of me, meeting my needs, making sure that I'm cared for. And then when that same survey is given to those in the ministry, those of us who have been called to lead, our major understanding is that we're supposed to be out in the world doing things. And so I'm wondering, have you experienced some of that friction? I know that from time to time that's always a source of tension in
there
ministry.
Is a source of tension there, that an expectation is put on the pastor to bring in new people, whereas the pastor is actually called to train up the people in the church to bring in the people. And that's for Presbyterians, that's a hard thing to actually share their faith. And I've been teaching them ways on how to share their faith through the Operation Andrew project, and encouraging people to pray for people who are needing a relationship with Jesus Christ, and to have personal contact with these people and to introduce them to Jesus Christ. It's called Operation Andrew because he was he was used by Jesus to introduce another apostle to Jesus. And so that's what we're doing, is that we're trying to introduce people to Jesus Christ and then bring them into the church family as a result of that.
Sure. Yeah, and we've done Operation Andrew as well in our congregation, and it's just basically raising the awareness of those who are faithful in our congregations to start thinking, there are other people I know who may desire to have a deeper relationship with God through Christ, and just doing some natural things that maybe we've lost over the years.
Christians are very scared of the E word, the evangelism word,
Correct.
and I think they picture us going on up to doors and knocking on the doors, which quite frankly I wouldn't do, because in today's society I just don't think that's safe. So I don't expect them to do it, because I wouldn't do it.
Sure.
But there are more natural ways of doing it, doing relational work with your work colleagues, even with your family members, even with the girl at the checkout and at the store. And so it's just finding more natural ways to do it that you're much more comfortable with, but knowing what to say also.
Sure. And the Bikes on Broadway and Blessing of the Bikes, that's just a real natural way that people don't even realize that's ministry. It's just doing something good for your fellow human beings, and we bless a bike, and that's part of our faithfulness, that's part of who we are. And you're right, it does help to break down some of those barriers, not only for church members who think, well, we're not really doing evangelism, to use that E word, but we're just caring for people, which is really, what I hear you saying is all we're trying to do in the first place. Yeah. What other interesting things have you all been up to?
Well, one of the most memorable services we've had a couple of memorable services. February 14th landed on a Sunday last year, so we had a renewal of wedding vows for about 16 couples. And it was a very emotional time, especially there was one couple who had just celebrated 60 years of marriage. And so we had our renewal of wedding vows, we had a wedding cake, we had a wedding photographer, and then at the Western Kentucky Highland Society, I was asked would I have a crooking of the tartan. And a crooking of the tartan is you bring a piece of your family plaid and you have it blessed. And so we had a church service where people came and they were dressed in their kilts and in their Scottish dress, and we had a piper, and we actually had new people join our church as a result of that service.
Wow.
And then they had their wedding at the Kentucky Festival. So those were just two very exciting days, especially the renewal of vows. It was so romantic and very exciting.
Now, have you brought over some tradition from your childhood that you've introduced in the church, and how, if you have, how's that been received? And
well, teaching some Scottish words.
Really? Okay.
Some people, when I say something, they go, "What did you just say?" And I say, "Oh, that's a Scottish phrase that we use back home." And or you'll find when I've just talked to my father or my brother, my accent gets so much stronger. And then I'll go back into my, as I call it, my local lingo, and then they'll say, "Could you just interpret that?" So there's definitely some words that I use, and the Southern accent has special words as well that I've had to get used to as well. So there's a good tension there. Where, we have a good laugh about and how to make hot tea, how to make it properly. And how to say Scottish words, especially when it comes to Robert Burns poetry, the Burns Supper that we had just recently. So they're just fascinated, by what Scotland is like, and especially they ask my opinions on the royal family and that kind of thing. And is the economy suffering over there as it is over here? And so there's a lot of relational things that we can talk about, but there are some things that are just totally Scottish.
Sure. So you're able to bring in a more global perspective just based on your family and history and some of your travels. Right. When you call home, do your family members think that you've picked up some Kentucky or Southern accent?
yeah, and then and then they say, yes, they do hear it. I don't hear it, but they certainly hear the drawl coming out, or the American twang, as they call it.
Really?
But by the end of the conversation, it's back to the way it should be.
Well, getting back to your faith, is there any guiding principle or favorite book of the Bible that really has spoken to you throughout your life that you draw great comfort from, or that helps guide you in your ministry or in your pastoral care of folks who look to you for guidance and support?
Off the top of my head, you know, Abraham, besides Jesus, is my hero, because he just had to get up and leave everything. You know, Jesus said, you got to go. And he had no clue where he was going to end up. And so at my ordination service, the words that were read were from Genesis, when Abram was called to leave his country, to leave his own folk and move to somewhere where he had never lived before. And I had certainly never lived in China before. I didn't even know how to use chopsticks. And I had never lived in the United States. I had only just passed my British driver's test, and I had to then forget all that and learn to drive on the opposite side of the road.
Oh my gosh.
So there was just all this culture shock that I had to deal with. And I think Abram had a lot of that to deal with as well. So definitely Abram.
Sure.
And so I would say that he's one man that I definitely can relate to.
Sure, because your own life has mirrored so much of that same type of story, being able to go and experience what the world has, and trusting God to lead you where you need to be. Yeah. What are your hopes and dreams for your personal ministry?
Well, I grew up in the church, but I would say I wasn't introduced to Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Saviour until I was 19. And I want that for my family, and I want that for every person.
Sure.
And so that's what I'm driven by, that my life was changed as a result of Jesus becoming my Saviour and Lord. He died for me, he rose again, and he's living, and he's alive and kicking. And that's what motivates me to get up in the morning and to share that faith that I have, because Jesus died for everybody, and and he has so much love for you and for me and for every single person that he's made, and he did so much, and I just want to share that.
Sure, and use that as the example. Well, thank you so much, Pamela, for being here today and sharing with us on Reflections. You've been watching Reflections, an outreach and a ministry of Paducah Cooperative Ministry. It is because of individuals like you who watch this program, and those 40-member congregations who support us financially, and those of you who support us financially who make programs like this possible and our ministry possible. If you want to know anything about Paducah Cooperative Ministry, or if you want to get involved, I encourage you to either call PCM directly or look online if you want more information. The website is paducahcoopministry.org. If you'd like to watch more of these types of shows about Reflections, you can always go to Paducah Channel 2 and search for Reflections and follow us on that. I want to thank you for watching our show today. My name is Jay Gottman, lead minister at First Christian Church, and we are so thankful that PCM is here in this community to do God's work with human hands. And we hope to see you next time on this TV program.